I'm super extraordinarily nervous about what I'm going to talk about because I have never talked about this before ever. I tend to talk as a subject matter expert on purpose, which I can do really well. I can do that in my sleep. As a chief purposologist, I've spent the better part of the last 20 years trying to help organizations think about their deeper purpose in the world. Much of our work is inspired by this simple quote from Aristotle. He said, "Where your talents and the needs of the world intersect, there lies your purpose." So when Rand called me in the spring and said the theme of this conference was the fierce urgency of now, you'd think that as a purposologist, that would be the perfect invitation to say, well, let's roll up our sleeves and get into the needs of the world that everyone in this room has the wherewithal to step up and serve and address in some way. We could easily spend the next 15 minutes thinking about, let's say, the UN sustainability goals and say, of all of these problems that are up here that need addressing, all these needs in the world, which ones are you committed to solving? Which problems could you use your organization's, your wherewithal to actually step up and address and move the ball forward on these topics? And so, in 20 minutes, we might figure out if that was a better use of my time. But as I was thinking about this, I was thinking about the people in this room are pretty purpose-driven people. I would say part of what attracted you to Stegen is probably the idea of using your organizations to do good things in the world. There's a level of consciousness that probably exists in this room where you're already naturally wired to think about what are the big problems that you could address. You are people of action, you're in the arena, as it were. And so, you can look at this wall of purpose over here. You are purpose-driven people. So as I thought about the whole fierce urgency of now and the thought of calling people to more action, to step up more courageously and urgently than they already are, I started to get this real kind of pit in my stomach. I started to feel super uneasy. And I think it's because in my own life, when Rand called me, I was at the point of total exhaustion. Total exhaustion. When we are purpose-driven people, are there things going on? When we are purpose-driven people, a lot of times our being essentially can be sacrificed at the altar of all of the worthy and noble doing that we're doing. And so the thought of calling people to do more, when I myself was feeling completely exhausted from being overcommitted to worthy things that needed attention, to projects that I felt really good about. There were things that needed to be done, but I was just exhausted. And it got me thinking, and you know how every once in a while when you're experiencing something in life, you'll get just the perfect quote or the perfect book will appear. And that's kind of what happened to me. I had gone about 100 days without having a break, working super hard, and this quote showed up in my inbox that kind of became the stimulus for what I want to try to talk about today. This is Thomas Merton. He's a Trappist monk. If you don't know who Thomas Merton is, Trappists are essentially like the Green Berets of contemplative monastic life. They go into deep silence, very contemplative. They essentially remove themselves from the world. But with Vatican II, essentially, a lot of contemplatives were called to bring the world of contemplation into the world of action. And so, at any rate, a little bit about him, but I got this quote in my inbox, and I'm just going to read the thing in its entirety because I suspect that if you're like me, this might hit you in a pretty poignant way. It certainly hit me in a pretty poignant way. He said, "There's a pervasive form of contemporary violence to which the idealist most easily succumbs: activism and overwork. To allow oneself to be carried away by a multitude of conflicting concerns, to surrender to too many demands, to commit oneself to too many projects, to want to help everyone and everything is to succumb to violence. The frenzy of our activism neutralizes our work for peace. It destroys our own inner capacity for peace. It destroys the fruitfulness of our own work because it kills the root of inner wisdom, which makes our work fruitful." When I read that, it hit me in my soul. I don't know if anyone else can relate to this quote in the room, the way that it hit me. And certainly as somebody who has spent the better part of the last several decades advocating for being people of great purpose, for saving the world, for doing what we can do to impact the world for the better. The thought that you could do that to such an extent that it would become a form of violence in your own life, that it would come at the sacrifice of your being, just hit me really hard. It hit me because I felt it internally. Even though I was doing things I felt really positive about, things I felt like were making a difference, I was making good use of my gifts, I really felt like my being was on empty, so to speak. So when you look at the work of the mystics and the monks and who are advocating for things like presence and for things like savoring the world and for attending to your being, that really intrigued me. And I don't know if you're like me at all, but a lot of times when I think about those things, I think that's for the yogis, that's for the mystics, that's for the monks. That's not for me. We're people who are wired to be in the world. We're doers. And so I've been really playing around with this idea of what's the relationship between purpose and presence, between saving the world and savoring the world, between doing and being. And I've come to kind of this place where I feel like that's where the real magic is. It's interesting, when I was listening to that Neil Tyson deGrasse, the world thing, most astounding fact, what came up for me was that quote from Joseph Campbell where he says, I don't think people are as interested in the meaning of life as they are the experience of being alive, which I think the world of presence and savoring the world and being is about the experience of being alive. I would take a little bit of issue because I think it's both. I think people want a meaningful life. They want to know that what they do matters. They want to know that they're using their gifts to make a difference. And simultaneously, they want that rich felt experience of actually being alive. Because if all you're doing, not all, if it's all doing without being, you can wear yourself to the bone. You can feel completely exhausted, completely depleted. But if you're only being and you're not doing, that's actually can feel like complacency in the face of human suffering. We're not really called to go to the mountaintop or just retreat like hermits. We are in the world. So I'm really playing around with this relationship between how do you wake up every morning driven by a purpose to make things better while simultaneously being present to all of the beauty just as it is. How do you wake up hell-bent on saving the world and doing your part to making it better and savoring every second of it along the way? How do you balance both doing and being? And while I was thinking about this, I came across this quote from E.B. White. E.B. White's the author of Charlotte's Web and other kind of children's books. And he had this great quote where he said, "Every morning I awake torn between a desire to save the world and an inclination to savor it." This makes it kind of hard to plan the day. Now, I think for the people, again, the people in this room, if we wake up with a choice to save the day or savor the day, which one are you going to do? Come on, you're going to save the day. We are purpose-driven, we're doers, we're going to save the day. Probably 90% of the time we're going to choose to plan our day based on what we can do. And maybe we'll savor during our vacation or during some kind of remote time. It's really important to remember the rest of his quote, which said, "If we forget to savor the world, what possible reason do we have for saving it? In a way, the savoring must come first." I chose this picture. This is at the top of Haleakala in Maui, or as I like to call it, Haleakala. But anyway, it's a beautiful place to watch the sunrise or to watch the sunset. Either one. You cannot help but savor the beauty of the world when you're sitting on top of a volcano, just watching with complete awe what's in front of you. And if you've ever spent any time in Hawaii, I would say the people of Hawaii have a real kinship with the environment. They savor the world around them. And it's not surprising then that because of that respect and awe and esteem that they hold the world in, they actually also happen to be the most progressive state in the nation, if not the world, on environmental policy. They have a commitment to be 100% driven by renewable energy by 2025. So that's a great just little example of, by virtue of savoring and esteeming the world around you, you actually feel more compelled to actually step up and save it. when I was talking about this whole concept of the being and doing and purpose and presence, Rand reminded me of the simple but kind of illustrative example of inhaling and exhaling. Like, nobody would say that one of those is more important than the other. So I think of inhaling is the savoring. Inhaling is the inspiration. Let me bring in the inspiration, and then I'll exhale meaningful action. And again, the beauty is in the both. If all you do is exhale nonstop meaningful action, eventually you're going to pass out. You're going to run out of energy. Of course, if all you do is inhale, you might get really high, but you might not accomplish very much. So the goal is this constant ebb and flow. Inspire, act, kind of the two of those together. So I've been thinking about that. I'm going to share with you something, again, it's just helping me think about what is the relationship between doing and being. One way I've come to think about it, it's actually brought a renewed sense of interest in the tradition in which I was raised, is I think about doing exists in the horizontal time, in chronological time. So this event happens in chronological time. Your day unfolds in chronological time. You have things you need to accomplish, things you need to do. Your lifetime, you're born into this world, and then you have 80 years before, as Vid says, you start planning for your disappearance. So that's the horizontal time. And most of us spend most of our presence and our mindfulness focused on present time. There's also a vertical dimension of time that exists right now in every single moment of the day. And your vertical time represents, to me, lower and higher levels of being. When you walked in this room, you were at a level of being. Hopefully, by the time you leave, you'll be at a different level of being. I almost think of this level of being as like a dimmer switch. Sometimes your level of being can be so depleted that there's barely a detectable light coming from you. Other times, when you've taken the time to nurture and care for your being, it can be so bright it's almost blinding. That's kind of the realm of mystics and saints and people who have really attended to their being, and they show up. These two things intersect with each other. How your level of being affects how you show up in the world. It affects what you choose to do in the realm of the horizontal. That's a little esoteric. I've never had a presentation with a cross in it, but for me, that was a helpful way to think about the relationship between the two. Maybe a more accessible metaphor would come from thinking about a skyscraper. So you think about these 80-story skyscrapers in New York. Think about any hotel you've stayed in there. There's 80 levels. Those could be 80 levels of being. Now, I don't know about you, but when I check into a hotel in New York, if they tell me, Miss Rushing, your room is on level 2, I immediately, I'm like, oh, God. I can already hear the sirens that are going to go off all night that I'm going to be paying attention to. I look out the window, I see traffic, I see congestion, I see kind of this frenetic energy, and it affects your kind of state. Now, if they told me when I check in, you're going to the 60th floor, assuming I'm not afraid of heights, I get in the elevator, I ascend going up. It gets quiet up there. It gets still up there. I get a little excited, like, what's the view going to be? I don't know what I'm going to see. It's a mystery what you're going to find up there. But usually, when you're up at a higher level, you look out and you have a whole different perspective. You can actually see a horizon. You can see the relationship between things. You can look down and you can see how the streets intersect with one another. So, at that level of being is going to influence how you come down and show up when you leave that level and come back into the world. It's amazing if you come from the Christian tradition, Jesus is always leaving the people, going up to the mountain, going back to the people, leaving and going up to the mountain. You're never going to stay at one level of being forever. It's just about attending to your level of being and being mindful of your level of being so that you have the capacity and wherewithal to join the world with the right kind of frame of mind. So I suspect if you're like me at all, you might end up with your level of being kind of down there in the trenches a lot because you're so passionate about the doing. There's a lot of passion. There's a lot of work to be done in the world, and often all of that noble doing takes its toll on your being. it takes a real toll. I remember, again, in my tradition, in the Christian tradition, we're called to be not just hearers of the word, but doers of the word, to attend to the orphans and the widows of the world. And sometimes I think to myself, in the name of doing great things, how often am I making orphans of my own children? How often am I making a widow of my partner because I'm off doing something noble in the world? I don't know how many of you were here last year when, I think it was you, or is that Paul right there? Played this beautiful voicemail that was left to you by, I would imagine, your 5 or 6-year-old son, saying, "Hello, Daddy. I don't know where you are tonight, but I love you, and I'm thinking about you." And anyone that was in the room that heard that, because we've all heard that message. We've all had that message from our children. And it was so poignant. And what's responding to that is your level of being. Your level of being will often tell you loud and clear that something isn't right, even though you're doing amazingly purposeful work. And the reason you're traveling around the world, the reason you're gone is because you're doing great things that need done. But that can't happen at the complete expense of your being. So my wish for everyone in this room is, as we're out in the world doing the things that urgently need doing, we also take care of our being. Take care of your being. And if you want to take care of your being, one of the easiest ways to do that is to change what you're doing. We know our doing shapes our being, and that can be both good and bad. We can do so much doing that our being gets obliterated. We can also change what we're doing to elevate our being. So, again, Paul, I don't even know you, but I hope you don't mind me using this. You took this massive, bold, brave decision to basically say, I'm going to walk away from the family business. I'm going to sell my home. I'm going to sell all my possessions. I'm going to put what I can in a backpack, and I'm going to take my family to Spain for a year. Now, that is what I would call doing something radically different. And I can only imagine that in that act, there was an enormous restoration of your being that happened, right? Ken was also here last year, and he, again, doing purposeful work in the world of well-being and healthcare, decided he needed to leave and attend to his family and take a trip around the world. Those are radical changes in what you're doing in order to rescue your being. It doesn't have to be that radical. I made a commitment when my girls were 3 years old that every month of July, we would go to Maui, and we would be off the grid, and we would spend a month together just doing nothing but enjoying each other and attending to one another. And I used to think that time in Maui was how I kind of refueled my tank so that I could get back to work with more energy. Now I have an appreciation that nourishing your being is an end in itself. It doesn't need justification that it made me a better doer. I need to take care of myself so that I can be a better human being. Joseph Campbell, how many of y'all have seen The Power of Myth, the Bill Moyer series that was done? It's a great series. In episode 4, Joseph Campbell says, every single person should have a sacred place or a sacred space where you don't know the news of the day, you don't know what's on your to-do list, you don't know what you need to deliver, you don't know what money you owe or who owes you money. It's just a sacred place where your life force, your energy, your essence, your being has permission to just be, unencumbered by the demands of happening, calling upon you from chronological time. So I don't know what that space is for you. You're the only one that can know what that sacred space is where your being is nourished amidst all of the doing. For Julie, it's running 60 miles over the weekend, which is insane. For Rand, it's roller skating in Highland Park to some weird disco music. That's awesome. Rick, we don't know where he goes, but he obviously has some source. So everybody needs to figure out where is it that you go for that sacred space that is liberated from chronological time so that your being can be nourished. And one of the most useful things that I picked up in ILP was the power of a positive no. Which is super helpful when you know what you're saying yes to, that you're saying yes to creating space to nourishing your being so that you can also have more capacity for your doing. It helps you say no to all of the never-ending urgent demands on your time. So anyway, the good news is your doing shapes your being, and also as your being starts to become elevated, your being will shape your doing. right? Well, the church I go to has a saying, says, your being draws your life. And I came to Stegen in the Mandela ILP class, and now I'm in the Teresa's Dragon's Gap class. And if you think about Nelson Mandela, you think about Mother Teresa, those are two people who spent their entire lives cultivating their being, kind of attending to the higher divine essence within them. Like they attended to that. And as a result of catering to their being, they were able to do and accomplish extraordinary things. I don't think, even if they knew the 2x2, that Wes is really great at teaching, I don't think it was the 2x2 that got them to accomplish what they accomplished. I think it was their being. Your being actually inspires your doing. Your being draws opportunities and people to you. Your being blesses your doing. And I think most importantly, your being is what enables you to infuse love into your doing. I loved everything Andy said about we all have a desire, a yearning, a capacity to infuse love in everything that we do. And Mother Teresa has a great quote. It could have been the quote that ended Andy's speech, was, it's not what we do, but it's how much love we put into it. Be the living expression of God's kindness. Let there be kindness in your face, in your eyes, in your smile. So how do we do that? How do we put love into our doing? I believe that to express love in our doing, we have to attend to our being. Love isn't something you put on the to-do list. It's something that emerges from nurturing and attending to higher influences. And that's what I'm working on. So I have no idea if anything I just said made any sense, but so I wanted to just recap it as simply as possible. What I was trying to communicate is we live in a world of doing, and there are certainly urgent things that need doing. We also live in a world of being that we can tune into at any moment in time. So take care of your being, because often your being is sacrificed in the name of great doing. If you want to raise your being, our doing shapes our being. So if you want to change your being, change what you're doing. And as you change what you're doing to influence your being will shape your doing. I feel like that Frank Sinatra song, who-be-doo-be-doo, who-doo-be-doo-be. They are kind of strangers in the night, the doing and the being. They feel paradoxically at odds, but they're not. They shape one another. So as you kind of reach higher levels of being, naturally what you do will evolve, and you'll be able to achieve higher levels of doing. And hopefully you'll do it with the same love in your heart that Andy so beautifully demonstrated in the ways of Bickford.